Hey guys, Sean here at the Gardener Center. So I had to break out the big table this week because I have lots of good stuff to talk to you guys about. And specifically this week I'm going to be talking about plants for containers. You know, your urns, your porch pots, your window boxes, your planters, call them what you want. We're in a very transitional time of the year right now, particularly as it relates to plants that you will grow in your containers. And there's two things that are really kind of going to dictate the plants you use going forward. And that is number one, and most importantly, is the impending first frost of the season, which is not too far off on the horizon. And number two, and it's something that people don't think about so much. I mean, everybody knows that it gets cold to a point where you can't have flowers anymore. But another thing that really kind of impacts the flowering plants that you can use in the fall is when our days start getting shorter, a lot of the plants that you grow in the summer need the days to be longer and the nights to be shorter. And as that starts to shift, a lot of these plants, even if it's warm, they just won't work anymore. So I'm going to talk about that a bit. So guys, lots to talk about this week, so stay tuned. All right, guys, so I know at this point a lot of you are ready to redo your annual planters. And the extent to which you redo them is really going to depend on a lot of things. I mean, sometimes your summer planters at this point, you know, you usually have your thriller and your spiller and your filler and maybe even a chiller in there. And a lot of times at this point in time, at this point in the year, maybe some of the components of the pot don't look so good anymore. So maybe your spillers and your fillers are kind of haggard, but your thriller is the best it's looked all year. Now would be a good time to go in and just maybe remove certain components and swap them out. You know, that's an easy thing to do. You know, it's kind of like if you're going to remodel one of the bathrooms at home. Are you going to do a gut job, or are you just going to change the paint color and maybe put in a new light fixture? That decision is up to you. What I'm here to help you with today is choosing your plants that are going to work best for you and for your budget, because the season gets a little wonky now because we have that first frost of the season coming. And you know, in the spring, I talk to you guys constantly about the last frost, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about the first frost because, and again, I know I seem obsessed, but you know, if you are gardening outside, and even if the extent of your outdoor gardening is just moving your house plants out for the summertime, the first frost and the last frost of the season dictates the beginning and end of our growing season. So these are dates and times that you really need to be conscious of if you're doing any kind of outdoor gardening. So in Connecticut, in this part of Connecticut on the shore, and I'm going to throw another holiday out at you like I always do to remember things, we typically get our first frost here in the last week of October or the first week of November. And what conveniently fits right in between those 2 weeks is Halloween. So always keep Halloween in mind as that first frost date. If you're gardening in New Canaan or Stamford, north of the Merritt Parkway, that actually could come a week earlier. So that's something to keep in mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should keep your house plants outside until Halloween. You want to watch the weather and watch the temperatures. Once it starts going below 50 every night, those guys you really want to bring in. And that first frost is kind of weird because first frost isn't necessarily a killing frost. And the first frosts are always very sporadic. You may wake up in the morning and see frost on your lawn on the side of the house, but nothing in the front yard or the backyard. So the first couple of frosts typically described as light frost and not necessarily a killing frost. But that's going to really dictate some of your plant choices here. So I'm going to talk about frost first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the day length, because it factors in, but it's not quite as important. So what you have to decide, whether you're just renovating your existing planters or if you're going to do a complete gut job and redo them from scratch, is a lot of plants that are offered now are going to be good from now until we get our first killing frost, 5-6 weeks from now. A lot of the other plants are going to make it through that first frost, through killing frost, and get you right through Thanksgiving time, till when you maybe switch out to your holiday Christmas or your winter planters. So that's a decision that that you have to make. I mean, I know even if you love to buy plants and love getting them, I know sometimes it's tough to make the decision to buy plants that you're going to be throwing away in 6 weeks. And I do have a little workaround for that'll help with the budget a little bit too, that I'm going to talk about. So that frost is critically important. So things that you typically associate with the summertime, like petunias, little coofias over here, celosias, even the ornamental peppers. I mean, think about peppers. These are ornamental, but they're related to the garden peppers that we eat in our vegetable garden. These guys are gonna be among the first to go when we get a frost. So those guys, you have to keep in mind that they're gonna be good until the first week of November or so. But then after that, you may have to swap them out again. If you want to use plants that are going to make it through that first frost and keep on going, possibly all the way through Thanksgiving, you want to look at number one, cabbages and kales. Garden mums over here on my right. I'm going to be talking a bit more about those in a few minutes. But cabbage and kale, and guys, a really good thing to look at this time of year during this transition time, because it works great for, number one, it's going to cover you in the frost department. And number two, it's going to make that decision as to whether you want to make the investment in new plants that are only going to be in your pot for 5 or 6 weeks. Look at perennials. Typically in the spring and summer, we steer people away from perennials because they don't bloom for very long. But in the fall, you don't need them to bloom for very long. So I like these beautiful little coreopsis here. And look at those are perfect late summer, fall colors. So the coreopsis, any of these heucheras, these guys come in all sorts of different shades. And these guys are actually evergreen, so they'll stay green in the winter time. So those are good choices. I have a bunch of different sedums, like these ground covers. These are great for using as spillers in your container. So beautiful part about the perennials is, number one, they're going to tolerate the frost, and number two, when you go to switch your containers next time, instead of throwing them in the compost pile or throwing them out, you can put them in your garden. So you're not wasting any money at all. They're doing double duty for you. So perennials are definitely something you want to look at if you're on the fence about making the investment. So that's frost. The other thing, and this is a common question that we start getting here in the Gardener Center, usually in the end of August, beginning of September. A typical call will be like, hey, I had these beautiful geraniums. They were gorgeous all summer. I've been feeding them every 2 weeks. I didn't overwater them. I didn't underwater them. My neighbors raved about them. But now they look beautiful, but they don't really have any flowers anymore. They're only making a flower here or a flower there. And that's nothing. If you're seeing that happening with geraniums or petunias or your begonias or another one, it's nothing that you're doing wrong. It's really, that's a byproduct of the shortening days. All of those plants of tropical origins, they need day length. They need the daylight hours to be longer than the night. Once we start getting into late August, September, that starts to shift where the days get shorter and the nights get longer, and it kind of equals out. And that triggers the plant to cycle down and stop flowering. So no amount of warmth, no amount of fertilizer is going to keep those guys going like they were doing in June or July. It's just a byproduct of the time of the year. So that's gonna cover my little frost and day length segment. I'm going to come back and talk specifically about some of these plants, so please stick around. All right, guys, so over the course of the past year, I have definitely talked a few times about plants that are kind of in that you either love them or hate them kind of a category. And I think, one of the most popular plants we sell here and pretty much everywhere in the fall are garden mums. And I think garden mums are probably the poster child for the I love them or I hate them as far as plants go. But listen, we sell a whole lot of them, and so does everybody else that sells plants. So there's got to be a reason for that. So I actually wanted to spend a few minutes and talk about garden mums, because it's an often misunderstood group of plants, because there's a couple of things that are a bit confusing about them. So number one, we buy them as annuals, we sell them as annuals, but they're actually perennials. You could plant your garden mums in your garden, and it's going to come back next year just like any other perennial would. There's a reason most people don't do that, and there's a reason we tend to steer people away from that. And that's because in order for a mum to be perennial and present itself the way they look when you buy them again next year, there are a lot of inputs that are necessary from you if you decide to do that at home. And on our end, on the grower's end, a lot of work goes into making garden mums look like those beautiful little round balls you buy them in the fall. Planted on their own and left to their own devices in the garden, this mum, like you see here, this beautiful shapely mum, that mum would probably grow 2 or 3 feet tall. It would probably have 5 or 7 lanky stems that would just flop all over the ground. And it would probably be flowering in December if it was still alive at that point. In order to create this, these mums are typically cycle pruned 4 or 5 times during the growing process at the grower. They're pinched, they're pruned, they're shaped. And number two, and here's the really tricky part, and this is why so many growers don't grow them, because it's really labor intensive. I talked earlier about the tropical plants and their propensity to stop flowering when the days get shorter and the nights get longer. Well, mums are the opposite. So mums are triggered into bloom. The bud set is initiated by longer nights and shorter days. Here's the problem. That doesn't happen here in Connecticut until the end of August, September. And that's really the time people want to start buying mums. So in order to get a mum to look like this in September, the growers literally have to turn the sun off every day. So they'll have fields of mums that have to be covered with blackout cloth. And they'll have to do this every single day. These mums have to be covered 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They have to be put into darkness artificially. And then every morning that cloth has to come off again. So the growers have to manipulate the mums to bloom when we want them to bloom. In your garden, they're going to bloom so late that the plant will probably be frozen by the time it's ready to bloom. So this is why most people don't treat them as perennials, and if you have ever tried it before, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, and it probably got ripped out sometime in July or August because they just sit there and they occupy space. But all that being said, they are absolutely invaluable at this time of year, because not only are they going to bloom more and more as we go into the season, because the days are getting shorter and shorter, they're frost tolerant and they're freeze tolerant. So these mums are going to take you all the way to Thanksgiving for sure. There's early season, mid-season, late season varieties, so you can even swap them out 3 times if you need to. And they're super hardy, and they're relatively inexpensive to buy, and it's just they're fun. And if you don't like the fall colors, they're in whites and pinks and purples too. So if you've steered away from them, they definitely have a place in the landscape and in the garden. Guys, that's all I have for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.